Extension of a Man was Donnie's final solo record, and very little publicity followed it. Sometime after its release in 1973, Donnie simply dropped out of sight.
Singer-composer Donny Hathaway had his musical roots here at New Jerusalem Baptist Church. At the age of 4, he toured and performed nationally and was proclaimed the youngest gospel singer at that time.
You probably still remember the haunting death of Donny Hathaway when he chose to end his own life from the 15th floor. But did you know that the tragedy of this soul music legend may have been premeditated, right inside an abandoned mansion in Los Angeles? A place shrouded in dark secrets where strange screams still echo through the walls, and traces of a shattered soul remain hidden from the world. It was there that Hathaway's unbearable pain and delusions were fed and nurtured. What really happened during the final years of his life? The untold tragedies of Donny Hathaway will be revealed in this very video. In the early 1970s, Donny Hathaway wasn't just one of the leading voices in soul and R&B, he was a shining star in the music world. His songs like Where Is the Love and A Song for You weren't just melodies. They were emotional stories soaked in the thoughts and longings of a deeply sensitive man. His collaboration with Roberta Flack produced timeless hits, captivating audiences so completely that his shows were always sold out, with fans lining up outside theaters just for a chance to see him perform. Hathaway achieved immense success in his musical career. Albums like Everything Is Everything, 1970, and Donny Hathaway Live, 1972, weren't just critically acclaimed, they left a lasting mark on music history. Where Is the Love, his duet with Roberta Flack, became an anthem, considered one of the most powerful songs of the 1970s and still beloved today. With a voice both rich and powerful, Hathaway didn't just sing, he lived each note, drawing listeners deep into the smooth, sometimes heart-wrenching beauty of his music. In an era when music was undergoing dramatic transformation, Donny Hathaway stood out like a brilliant star in a colorful universe. Whenever he sang, the world seemed to pause, and only the music remained. Yet behind the spotlight, few knew the truth. While Donny Hathaway stood at the very peak of his career, adored by thousands, that very spotlight was hiding a dark, complex secret. In 1973, during a performance night in New York, Donny Hathaway left the audience bewildered as his voice became disjointed, uncontrolled. A strange silence fell over the room, and the usually passionate fans could only stand still, watching in confusion as their idol displayed bizarre behavior on stage. Just a month later, during a morning studio session, Donny suddenly screamed and clutched his head, his face twisted in pain. Inside his mind, haunting voices echoed, "You will fail. Your time is over." A studio staff member who witnessed the scene from outside thought it was just an intense moment of artistic immersion. But the tension in Donny's eyes betrayed something deeper. A silent internal war, a creeping instability that blurred the lines between music and fear. At that time, few could have imagined that behind these strange signs lay one of the greatest mysteries of his life. A secret that would gradually unfold over the following years, like a warning that fame doesn't always come with happiness. Just a few months later, while Hathaway's career and talent were at their peak, a turning point occurred, one that would change everything forever. In a moment of overwhelming chaos, as Hathaway faced a major contract negotiation with a record label, he found himself in a state of emotional collapse, pushed to the brink. In that fragile moment, he unknowingly signed a contract that only later he would realize had locked him into deeply unfavorable terms. His mind, exhausted and clouded, wasn't sharp enough at the time to catch the unreasonable clauses. That contract would forever leave a mark on Hathaway's life, a scar that could never be erased. Although major hits like Where Is the Love and A Song for You brought him widespread fame, the money he earned from them paled in comparison to the value of what he gave to the music world. Hathaway received only 10% of the revenue from his recordings, while the record labels and industry executives made massive profits off the very works he had created. In the days that followed, Hathaway began to see the injustice. He felt like a pawn in the music industry, with every hit making others wealthy, while he struggled alone in the shadows. But by the time he uncovered the truth about that contract, It was already too late. His career, as grand and iconic as it was, had become shackled by a system he could never truly control. As the dark clouds began to overshadow Hathaway's musical career, the challenges at work not only affected his mental state, but also started to infiltrate his family life. In 1967, when Donny Hathaway met Eulalia Vann, they were immediately drawn to each other, a love that was intense, pure, and full of passion. After some time of getting to know each other, they married, built a family, and began nurturing shared dreams. The early years of their marriage were filled with happiness and hope. They had a child and created a home brimming with laughter and joy. By the mid-1970s, as Hathaway's career reached its peak, he gradually felt the overwhelming pressures not only from the music industry, but also from the tumult within his own mind. One night in December 1977, after returning home from a stressful performance, the change in Hathaway became evident. Eulalia quickly noticed the signs of an uncontrollable transformation. While Hathaway remained a loving husband and devoted father, he couldn't escape the storms raging in his mind. An unexpected outburst occurred on Christmas Eve. Hathaway screamed and shouted in the living room. Eulalia stood there, eyes filled with tears, unable to believe what she was witnessing. He not only hurt her with words, but also with inexplicable actions, making her feel as if she were living in an unending nightmare. She tried to help, to salvage the relationship, but within Hathaway, an uncontrollable force was taking over. This tension gradually created irreparable cracks in their family, driving them further apart. In 1978, after increasingly intense arguments and long anxiety-filled nights, Eulalia, though still in love with her husband, could no longer endure. She officially divorced Donny Hathaway, ending a tumultuous and tragic marriage. After the marital breakdown, Donny Hathaway sought to distance himself from New York City, away from painful memories and lingering fractured relationships. He decided to move to an old mansion perched atop a hill in Los Angeles. This house, despite its elegant and serene exterior, concealed a strange atmosphere and undiscovered secrets. With its ideal location overlooking the sea, this expansive mansion offered Hathaway a glimmer of hope for the peace he desperately sought. He thought this would be a place to start anew, away from the upheavals and pressures of his career and personal life. But the house was not just a refuge. It seemed to serve as a reminder of a past he couldn't escape. The mansion featured peculiar architecture, dark rooms, and endless hallways, creating a sense of distorted time and space. Each time Hathaway entered, he felt as though something in the air was watching and reflecting his own mood. The strangely curved wooden walls and dim light from old lamps made the space even more gloomy, as if the house possessed a mysterious power enveloping it. On a dark winter night in 1978, Donny Hathaway sat alone at the piano in the silent Los Angeles mansion. Suddenly, in the dim light, he sensed a strange presence, a shadowy figure standing beside him, silently observing every movement of his fingers on the keys. The piano's sound, though still full of emotion, was interrupted by eerie screams echoing through the empty space. Hathaway, trembling, stopped playing, but the nightmare refused to end. The next morning, when he shared this experience with those around him, they merely shook their heads, insisting nothing unusual had happened in the area for many years. At that moment, Hathaway realized that the shadow from that night was the ghost of his own tormented soul. After Donny Hathaway's sudden death in 1979, this old mansion became a frightening mystery. The house, where Hathaway had sought refuge from his psychological storms, now remained only as a shadow of the past, filled with strange sounds that no one could explain. One autumn day in 1981, Donny Hathaway, Donny's daughter, decided to return to the house her father had called his final refuge. It was a cold morning when she passed through the rusty gates of the mansion, a strange feeling enveloping her, as if an invisible force was pulling her inside, making it impossible to stop. She stepped inside. The empty space, dust-covered walls, and scattered old furniture gave the impression that the house was still alive, as if someone was staring at her. Suddenly, strange noises echoed from within the house, the creaking of old doors, and in the distance, sighs like those of an invisible wind. When Donita stepped into the living room, she had mentally prepared herself for a scene of desolation. Dust covering every surface, paint peeling off the ceiling in jagged flakes, and old tattered curtains hanging limply, like relics from a bygone era. Yet what truly horrified her wasn't the physical decay of the space. It was a detail so small, so seemingly insignificant, that its chilling meaning didn't register right away. As she walked past the large west-facing window, faint light filtered through the cracked panes, casting dim streaks across the room. Something compelled her to pause in front of a heavy, dark brown curtain, thick with dust and carrying the musty scent of time itself. Driven by an unshakable instinct she couldn't quite name, she reached out and pulled the curtain aside. In that very moment, it was as if time suddenly froze. There, on the aged, gray-white wall, a number stood out clearly. 15. It was painted in a bright, chilling red, sharp, haunting, and the color of blood just dried. Donita instinctively took a step back, her fingers clutching the edge of the curtain like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The cold she felt didn't come from the breeze seeping through the broken window. It came from deep within her chest, a jolt of dread that crawled down her spine, the kind of fear only felt in the presence of something far beyond human understanding. That 15 wasn't just a number. In Donita's mind, it didn't feel like it had been painted on. It felt etched into the wall with layers of sorrow, like a cipher hiding a buried truth. She couldn't yet explain what it meant, but her gut told her this wasn't some random marking. On the contrary, it felt like a desperate message from someone long gone, like a final confession hidden behind the curtain of time and silence. Things grew even more unsettling as Donita ventured deeper into the unexplored corners of the mansion. The air around her felt heavier, thickened by layers of time-worn dust and the forgotten imprints of the past. Every door she opened felt like peeling back another layer of history, each space saturated with the scent of memories and a sorrow too elusive to name. She stepped into a dark room where even the faintest light struggled to pierce through the windows, long sealed by grime and creeping moss. Scattered across the space were aged armchairs, draped in cobwebs, as if people had once sat there for hours, only to vanish suddenly from the timeline. The room wasn't just cold in the physical sense, it carried a silence so dense it felt unnatural. It wasn't the peace of stillness, but the kind of silence that holds back all the things that were never said. As Donita wandered through the shadows, her gaze landed on an old wooden desk pressed against the far wall. One of its drawers sat slightly ajar, revealing yellowed scraps of paper and small glass bottles rolling loosely inside. She pulled it open carefully and discovered a weathered set of medications, along with several prescriptions, clearly marked with her father's name, Hathaway. Though time had smudged much of the ink, one detail repeated with unsettling clarity: 14 doses a day. That number hit her like a stone in the chest. 14. It was the amount of medication Hathaway had needed each day to keep his delusions at bay. Not for a week, not for a month, but for what seemed like most of his life. Grief rose in her like a flood, sudden and unrelenting, washing away the rational distance she'd tried to maintain. The truth she had resisted for so long finally stood before her, undeniable and raw. The father she had loved so deeply and longed for endlessly had spent the majority of his life trapped in the darkness of schizophrenia, a disease he had battled alone, in silence and in solitude. Just as she collapsed to the floor, clutching the old prescriptions as if trying to hold on to the last fragments of her father's memory, an unexpected sound echoed from behind her. It was the sound of a piano. Faint and fragile, the melody drifted through the air from the old instrument at the end of the hallway, a piano that should have long since become nothing more than a rotting ornament. The notes weren't full or harmonious, they were fragmented, almost like a whisper. The music carried no warmth of life, yet neither did it belong entirely to the realm of the dead. Each note seemed to knock gently on the door of Donita's heart, stirring a connection that defied logic, defied distance, defied death itself. In that moment, Donita no longer felt alone. The piano's voice was a call, tender, desperate, a final farewell from a soul that had not yet moved on. A father long gone, yet still tethered to the world by the haunting weight of a daughter he could never forget. Each broken phrase of melody resurrected something deep within her, as though Hathaway, from some distant beyond, was using music to speak the words he never could. "I've always been here." And for Donita, it no longer felt like a supernatural event. It felt like truth, not metaphor, not illusion, but the last and most heartbreaking proof of a love that had endured in silence, painful, unseen, but profoundly real. Ever since that strange incident, the mansion that once served as the Hathaway family's cherished home began to take on a different character. It was no longer a symbol of old-world luxury or the passage of time. It became a place no one dared to approach. Over time, rumors spread across the region like a gloomy mist, seeping into every whispered story. People started calling it the House of Echoes, a name that felt both vague and ominous, perfectly capturing the eerie sensation it stirred in anyone who stepped past its rusted iron gate. Those hired to renovate the mansion came with one goal: to clean, restore, and turn the place into something that could be sold or repurposed, but not a single one of them was able to finish the job. Almost immediately after beginning their work, they began to experience things that defied any logical explanation. Footsteps echoed from the upper floors even though the house was empty. There were soft but relentless knocks like someone's heartbeat coming from the cracked old walls. Some swore they heard piercing screams in the dead of night, like pain that had been buried for decades, finally finding a way to escape the darkness. Others claimed they constantly felt watched even when no one was around. Lights flickered on and off at random. Tools were mysteriously knocked over. Windows slammed shut without a breeze. Everything seemed to be moving according to an unseen will, angry, guarded, and very much aware. One electrician who worked there for just 3 days abandoned the job without ever asking for payment. In the brief report he left behind, there was only a single line: "There's something in that house that doesn't want us there." Since then, all plans to repurpose the mansion have been indefinitely postponed. The house slowly faded into obscurity, becoming just another ghost story told late at night, drifting between cigarette smoke and the last drops of whiskey. People say that if Donny Hathaway's spirit still lingers there, he's not just a ghost. He's a living memory, a grief that never found release, and perhaps a father who still can't let go of the place that was once his home, the place that witnessed the final shattering moments between him and the daughter he loved. And so the mansion was completely abandoned, left to stand as a silent witness to the pain and tragedy Donny Hathaway had endured. At this point, do you feel the chills as you uncover the mysteries hidden inside Donny Hathaway's abandoned home? These eerie details may, in a strange way, be the very clues to understanding the tragedy that followed him from childhood to his haunting death. When Donny Hathaway was born in 1945 in Chicago, his family lived in a poor neighborhood under harsh conditions. His mother, Eulalia, was the only woman shouldering the responsibility of raising Donny and his siblings. While she worked tirelessly to provide for them, she couldn't always be there to meet Donny's emotional needs. In his early years, Donny witnessed his parents' fierce arguments, endured beatings from his father, and experienced the deep ache of emotional neglect. The absence of a loving, present father left a profound scar. But it was the lack of affection from his mother, the one person he loved unconditionally, that made Donny's psyche even more fragile. Though Eulalia loved her son deeply, she was overwhelmed by the weight of survival and couldn't devote enough time to her sensitive child. One winter night in 1953, Donny vividly remembered peering through the living room window, watching his parents fight. Strange sounds echoed from inside, pounding on tables, shouting, and shattering objects. His mother, in a rage, shouted words he couldn't fully understand, but he felt a looming separation. That night, for the first time in his life, a cold wave swept through his mind. Does anyone truly love me? The emotional void and constant conflict in his family were like a violent storm that consumed his soul. Those years became a nightmare Donny could never shake. The feelings of abandonment and the lack of parental love took root deep inside him, and the memories never left. Surrounded by family, yet always feeling alone, he was like a rolling stone among the ruins of a broken home. Those days etched themselves deep into Donny Hathaway's mind as wounds that never healed. The isolation he felt within his own family, the absence of a safe place to rest his soul, left an indelible mark. Often he'd sit in his room, gazing out the window. Only music and far-off dreams gave him a sense of peace. But the unhealed trauma slowly fueled the delusions that would stay with him for life. Looking back, Donny Hathaway never imagined that the wounds from his childhood, the neglect, the emotional starvation, would one day grow into waves of psychological torment he could never escape. And the psychiatric prescription, 14 pills per day, later found by Donita in the abandoned mansion, said it all. In the end, it was that quiet suffering that led to the greatest tragedy of his life. It happened early on the morning of January 13, 1979. Donny Hathaway was in his room at the Essex House Hotel in New York. Everyone thought he was preparing for a new recording project, one he was deeply passionate about and hoped would revive his career. But little did they know, his mind wasn't filled with melodies, but with a terrifying decision that only he understood. The room on the 15th floor of the Essex House Hotel, where Hathaway chose to rest before heading into a crucial recording session, has now become a haunting place in the tragic story of his life. In recent days, Hathaway has been battling not only the sounds of music, but also the tidal waves crashing through his own mind. Delusions, invisible voices, and an overwhelming sense of being watched clung to him, making him feel like a prisoner trapped within his own body. He couldn't bring himself to share the torment he was carrying inside with anyone. That night, after finishing what would be his final notes, he made his choice, jumping from the 15th floor of the Essex House. Police received an emergency call shortly after. When they arrived, they found Donny Hathaway's body, one of R&B's greatest legends, lying motionless on the sidewalk beneath the towering hotel. His death shocked not only his family and fans, but marked the end of a life driven by passion and silenced by unspoken pain. The Hathaway family was devastated. Donita, who adored her father, collapsed outside his office, unable to believe the news. "No way," she whispered through tears. "It can't be him." It was all too sudden, too unreal. No one could accept that Donny Hathaway had chosen to end his life from the 15th floor. Yes, the number 15. It wasn't a coincidence. That number had haunted him. It wasn't just a number. It was a warning, a cryptic sign that Donita would discover years later on the wall behind the curtain in the abandoned mansion. Unbelievably, just a week before his death, neighbors saw Hathaway carrying a bucket of red paint into the house. Maybe he painted that 15 himself as a chilling foreshadowing of his final decision. Tragically, no one realized it in time. Now it's too late, and that number lives on, not only in the house, but in the minds of those left behind. Although Donny Hathaway is gone, his music lives on, an eternal flame for those who love it. Iconic songs like A Song for You, Where Is the Love, and This Christmas have stood the test of time, echoing through the seasons and into the hearts of listeners for decades. Each melody carried more than just notes. It carried his soul, his pain, his love, and his loss. Yet looking back, his life remained filled with unfulfilled recognition. Despite building a musical empire, Hathaway never received the acknowledgement he deserved. And after his death, another tragedy emerged. His estate was modest. No one knew the exact amount, as no official documents were ever made public. One cold March evening in 1980, in a rundown house on the outskirts of Los Angeles, the Hathaway family sat silently around an old wooden table to read his will. They had no idea the contents would break their hearts even more. Donita Hathaway, her hands trembling, picked up the first page, unable to face the words. As she flipped through the pages, she couldn't hide her disappointment. The numbers were shockingly low, empty, almost meaningless. Her legendary father had left behind a legacy with no riches to show for his greatness. A heavy silence filled the room. The family sat frozen, eyes vacant. What remained was a cruel truth. Donny Hathaway left behind nothing but cold, emotionless figures. Despite his music being etched into history, there was no wealth to testify to his greatness. Only thin sheets of paper, like exit tickets from a world that barely acknowledged his brilliance. Donita looked at her mother, the woman who had weathered every storm alongside her father. Her mother's eyes were empty too, but this time they reflected a deep, crushing disappointment. She sat still, staring into space, as if drained from a lifetime of pain and poverty, both physical and emotional. Suddenly, Donita burst into tears. She couldn't hold it in any longer. They had hoped, prayed, that someone, somewhere, would have honored his contributions. But now, all that was left was pain. What the family mourned wasn't just money, but the lack of recognition for Hathaway's legacy. Holding the will in her hand, Donita screamed, "Why wasn't my father properly rewarded?" His timeless songs still echo in the hearts of music lovers. But to the Hathaway family, they are a constant reminder that Donnie, though a musical legend, left this world without the recognition or justice he deserved. Donny Hathaway's death was not just the loss of a music icon. It was a painful reminder of the injustices within the very industry he gave his life to. Yet, his legacy endures. His immortal melodies and unforgettable lyrics stand as eternal witnesses to the greatness of a man who was never truly seen. Especially the abandoned mansion in Los Angeles, where Hathaway sought peace in his final years, remains a haunting symbol of his inner turmoil. That eerie home, filled with shadows and distant screams from every corner, is a living monument to the storms he could never escape.